This technique is absolutely devastating, so I'm going to ask you guys to do me a favor real quick before I get into it. Please be mindful of the amount of stripers and hybrids y'all actually keep after learning how to fish this technique, because after I've taught you this one, you're going to be catching your limit again and again and again. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you've been here before, if not, welcome. This is the King of Anglers channel, and I know everything about fishing, freshwater, saltwater, and fly fishing domestically and around the world. And today's technique is going to be a long-range bobber fishing technique for catching striped bass. Now, this is primarily for freshwater. I suppose you can do it in saltwater too, but I don't have a whole lot of saltwater stripers here down in Georgia. I'm from Atlanta, so we don't have a whole bunch of them. We get a few, but not like how you would get in New Jersey or New York or whatever. But you guys could probably use that up there too, in the surf up there. So here in this area, we have a lot of river run stripers, a lot of reservoir stripers, stripers, hybrids, and white bass, all three. Though this technique is pretty much for all three of those fish collectively. So here, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, the very northernmost part of Florida, I'm sure Texas, and a bunch of other places where y'all have stocked hybrids and stripers. This is right up your alley. Maybe even on the West Coast, those guys out in California, y'all have some stripers over there. You might be able to pull this off there too. Just know that this has kind of been a regional type of technique. The furthest away from here, I know that people use it is, I think, Oklahoma. But what we're going to do with this technique is you're going to be fishing for fish that are normally out of casting range. Everybody's had that situation where they're standing on the bank and they're seeing stripers going nuts, but they're just out of casting range. They're 100 yards, 130 yards away, and you can't reach them. Even with your longest casting baits and on your best rods, they're just out of range. You just can't get to them. This is going to help you get to a lot of those fish that you're going to be able to catch that would normally be out of range and that most everybody can't get to. First of all, the most important thing you're going to need is the actual float. There are different styles of floats that I use. Number one is the popping cork style, and the other one is sort of this egg-shaped deal right here, the pear shape. I like to use those. Getting into it, first of all, you're going to need somewhere to get these floats at. So the one that's the easiest to get is the launcher float. I had to search around for this for a while. This is actually a long-distance casting float that was designed for this very technique that I'm sharing with you. The only problem is that they have only so many sizes. The biggest size is this one, and it only goes up to 2 1/8 of an ounce. So just a little bit over 2 ounces. Now the shape is very good. Is that aerodynamic shape helps you to throw a long distance. It's just not as heavy as I need it to be to load some of these rods that I'm going to be talking about when we get into the actual tackle portion where I'm telling you about what to throw these things on. So those floats work really well, especially if you're not fishing in a river that's more than, give or take, 100 feet wide. If you're fishing big water and you're below a dam or a spillway or something and it's a pretty good distance across, you may have to either A, make your floats yourself, or B, find someone else who will make your floats. What you do is you get these pear-shaped floats from your local tackle shop, or if you're out of the area, you might have to order one of these from someplace more region specific. Like I say, find you a tackle shop out of the Tennessee River area or somewhere down in Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi or something like that, and they carry these types of floats. You may have to order them and have them shipped to you. What you do is you take one of those big pear-shaped floats and you'll cut off the bottom part, and I like to take a bank sinker, at least 3 ounces, 3 to 4 ounces, and you shove that up into the bottom section of it. And take that wire that it came with and you just wrap it around and shove it down in there. And you can glue it or take some epoxy and put that in there. And it'll harden it and it'll stay put. Now to the top, I add a 3-way swivel and an owner hyperwire split ring. That's either a number 5 or a number 7 split ring to a saltwater grade 3-way swivel. The launcher float that you can just buy at retail doesn't come with that. Actually, pretty much any long distance float that you can buy won't come with a 3-way swivel at the top. If it does come with a swivel, it'll just come with your simple barrel 2-way swivel. Now you can still get away with using that. I just prefer a 3-way swivel at the top of mine because it makes it easier for me. So what you're going to need is the actual float to start with. Then you're going to need some leader material. Now, monofilament or fluorocarbon is up to personal preference. Of course, monofilament floats up in the water column a little bit easier, and so it rides currents a little bit better. I would also probably lean towards monofilament if you're fishing in somewhere that's really rocky and very snag-ridden, because monofilament takes the abuse and the abrasion better than fluorocarbon does. Anybody that fishes around really rocky, snaggy areas, you've seen the damage that fluorocarbon goes through when it gets dragged over rocks. And if you're a saltwater fisherman, you've definitely seen what kind of damage that those oyster bars and stuff can do to fluorocarbon. So monofilament is primarily what I use, but when they get finicky and the water's really clear, I do go with a fluorocarbon. I will use Yozuri Disappearing Pink fluorocarbon, at least 20 pound. You can go up to 50 pound. On your leader material, I kind of stay at about the 20 to 30 pound range. I use 20, 25, and 30. That's about as heavy as I go for the majority of it. I like that Disappearing Pink, and I also like this High Seas fluorocarbon here. That's 25 pound. I use both of these in salt water, but I will flip-flop and use them on these striper rigs as well. As far as my monofilament goes, I'm not super brand specific, but I do like this Berkeley Prospect Chrome Premium monofilament. This is really, really good, soft, limp line. It's good as a filler line as well. I learned about this stuff when I was fishing in Tampa off the Skyway Bridge, catching gag groupers and stuff like that. That was a guy. Most people down there are using like up to 80 pound test down there for pulling these gag grouper out of those rock piles and those reefs and stuff like that. But there was a guy that was using 25 pound mono, this stuff, and just pulling them out of there. And it was a whole lot easier, and so I had been using that for some things since then. And I found out that not only is it good as leader material for that, but it's also good for the striper rig, and it's also good for throwing big swim baits at largemouth and all kind of other stuff. So I just pull a couple feet of that off. So the last thing you're going to need is the actual bait or your hook. You can use a standard live bait hook at the bottom of this rig if you prefer to use live bait. I like the Nico style hooks that I use bass fishing because here down south, the bait fish that we're using are threadfin shad, small gizzard shad, and what we call, even though the rest of the country would probably just call them shiners, here at the bait shops down south, you differentiate them by size. So we'll say crappie minnows or bass minnows, and they'll know what you're talking about then. You just walk in the bait shop. Hey, let me get 2 dozen crappie minnows. They know what you're talking about. So, another thing you can use is the bucktail jig. You can add that to the bottom of your rig. But this is how you actually assemble the thing. So, the way you put this together is you have your float, your 3-way swivel at the top. You got yourself some leader material. I'm going to pull off a section here. Now, the thing is, this is not a slip float type of deal. You're going to be using a fixed leader, so you can only have so much of it. I normally take off about 3 to 4 feet a leader. So I've got myself 4, maybe 5 feet a leader at the most. The most I would be comfortable with throwing is about 6 foot. Anything longer than that, it just gets to be too much. So I've got myself a section of 25 pound fluorocarbon right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that in and tie one side to my 3-way swivel. You can use an improved clinch knot. You can use a Palomar knot while it's free floating also. Those are pretty much the only knots that I will use when I'm fishing this rig. I don't trust the trilene knot in some of these other ones, so I just kind of keep it like that. Right. And then I tighten it down. So I've got that right there, and I clip off my tag end. So now I've got one end tied to the leader line on that 3-way swivel. Just like that right there. And I've got so many feet of it. On the other end, me personally, I like to just use a jig head. Now the jig heads, I prefer the Z-Man variety, or these Northland tackle ones. I also will use the Dirty Jigs guppy heads. I use those a lot in bass fishing, so I just use those that I have laying around. I like them in particular because of the wire gauge of the hook that's on them. It's a small hook, but it's still very strong. Mind you, I'm not catching 20 and 30 pound stripers doing this. I'm catching schoolies when I'm using this technique. So most of these fish are averaging somewhere between 5 to, give or take, 12, maybe 15 pounds at the most. These are schoolie size fish, so I don't need a super thick 4X strong hook on it. I just need one that's a 2 or 3X, you know, just strong enough to not get bent out. Plus these rods I'm throwing them on are kind of soft at the tip, so I can absorb that shock. They don't straighten my hook out. So once you've done that, you've tied off to the one end. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to tie to the jig head, doing the same knot. Now, you can tie a loop knot to your jig head or your lure or your hook at the bottom if you want to. Some people say that it gives them more action. I prefer to tie direct and cinch it down like that right there. The other reason why I prefer to use these jig heads is because of where the line tie is. The line tie is directly straight out of the top of the head. This keeps it at a more natural presentation. If I was to use a jig head where the line tie is more towards the front, it would hang vertically in the water at rest, and that just doesn't look natural. Fish don't like it. I put my line on the top like that, and I use these jig heads that have the line tie directly facing straight up at a hard angle, because when I stop moving the bait, it will still sit naturally in the water column. It still keeps the bait horizontal, laying sideways that way. Crappie fishermen know what I'm talking about when they do that. So now that I've got that on there, the actual baits that you're going to be able to put on there. So you can use a bucktail jig like we were talking about before. Bucktails work. VMC makes a good one, up to, I believe, a 3/4 ounce size. You can use that. You can use these little bit bigger ones. These are a Captain Max bucktail jig. These are pretty good. I will fish these on a loop knot, the bucktails. You can use those. I would not use one that's heavier than about a 3/8 ounce. Most of the ones that I use are a 1/4 ounce or 3/8. I don't normally go any heavier than that. Fluke style baits work. Your Zoom flukes, your Strike King caffeine shads, Yamamoto D shads, the X Zone. X Zone makes a really good one that works pretty well. I like that fluke style bait. These are the Rapala Crush City Stingmans. These you have to order internationally. I bought these when I was in Mexico, specifically for stripers, and it was lights out. They like this longer body with the whippier tail than they do on the standard fluke, I've noticed, and I tend to get some bigger bites on that also. I'm not doing anything fancy with this either. Literally, I'm just taking it and just sticking it on there like how you would any other kind of soft plastic. Just take it, center it, run it up on there, and push it over the bait keeper. Like that right there. That's it. Now, mind you, the hook doesn't have to be too far back on the bait. I know that some people are going to look at it and be like, well, the hookup ratio is probably not all that great. They're probably grabbing the back end of it and missing the hook. Not really. They're headshotting these. I like colorful jig heads for that reason too, because I'm bringing their attention up here to where the hook is on the front part. Hot pink is good. Chartreuse is good. White is good. Some combination of those colors is also pretty effective. They'll normally headshot the bait and then eat it head first, so I'm not missing a lot of bites when I do that. Now, when you're actually casting this, what I do is I'll take it and bury just the tip of the hook into the top of the bobber. And what happens is when I'm casting it, it'll either come apart when it's in the air, or it will come apart on touchdown after the float hits the water. And to separate from here, and then I've got 5 feet of leader where all that line comes down and my lure is just hanging down beneath the float. There are a few ways that you can retrieve this rig also. You can, I like to give it short pops. I'll reel up tight to it. I'll let it drift with the river current. Give it a couple twitches and let it sit and just let it drift. And then I'll reel up some more slack and I'll just give it a few more twitches and just let it sit. What a strike looks like is you'll notice the float either just swimming away in one direction or the other, or you'll see it go down completely. At that point, I reel in and set the hook. Now, another retrieve that I do with this is if I'm fishing it with a paddle tail swim bait. You can throw paddle tails as well on this rig. I like the Little Dipper by Reaction Innovations, but I will also use a Z-Man paddler swim bait or a Z-Man diesel minnow. I'll throw that on one of these rigs as well. You can throw that out and you can slowly reel it back to you, the entire retrieve, and that works as well. I will also throw in a few pauses here and there when I'm using the Z-Man one, because the Z-Man plastics are so buoyant. They will sit horizontally without hanging down, and they'll still, you know, kind of swim with the current and stuff like that. Looks like an injured or dying shad. And the stripers can't stand that thing. As far as the actual tackle and gear required to throw this thing, you need a surf rod. A surf rod is a must-have item. You got to have a long surf rod, at least between the 10 and 11 foot range. I've tried this on a bunch of different rods. I've tried it on shorter ones, I've tried it on longer ones. The sweet spot seems to be between 10 and 11 feet. So if you can get you a 10 or a 10 and a half or 11 foot surf rod, a medium heavy power that will throw up to 3 to 4 ounces of weight, those are the ones that you want. I like the I like the St. Croix Siege. That one's very good. The Penn surf rods are very good as well. I have a Tsunami one that works pretty good as well. Those are all very good rods that you can throw this heavy rig on. As far as the size of the reel you want it to be at least a 5,000. You need something that can hold at least 300 yards of, say, 30-pound braid. That's another place where a lot of people go wrong when they're trying to fish this technique, is they'll use braid that's too heavy as their main line. You don't really need super heavy line because you're going to cut down your casting distance when you're doing that. I'll use 30-pound braid, and if I have to go heavy, I'll go heavy at the leader. I'll use a 50-pound leader, but you're cutting out your casting distance when you're using lighter line. 30-pound braid, 40-pound braid is okay. 50 is kind of where the limit is. If I'm fishing for really giant fish, though, if you've got big stripers around, I may push it to 65, but then at that point, I'm using a heavier float and I'm going to a longer rod. I'm going to use a 12-foot at that point at least. So you need a, 6,000 size reel, 30-pound braid, and a 11-foot rod. That's kind of where the sweet spot is when you're throwing this technique. You can make a long cast over 100 yards with that particular setup right there. So once you've got your leader tied on, you got your bait tied on, obviously you tie your main line here. Now, one of the things that you need to know about that is that I'm tying a little shock piece of leader to that part. I'm not just tying my braid directly to that, because my braid, just like if you're throwing a popping cork in salt water at redfish and speckled trout, all the guys that fish popping corks, you know about this, is that if you're fishing straight braid, tie it straight to the cork, you're going to get your braid wrapped up in it. So what I'm doing before I attach it to my line is I'm tying a little piece of heavy monofilament right to the other end of it, and then I'll tie a braid to leader knot back here somewhere. I'll give myself a good maybe 5 inches or so of leader material to the other side of that swivel before I tie on my main line. An FG knot or a uni knot or something like that. Something you can do to connect your two lines together right there. Your braid to your leader is what you need to be doing on the other side of that first. Don't just tie straight braid to that. Also, braid can slip if you tie it right down on there. So I prefer to have a little bit of leader right there. And some people don't put that hook right there in the top of the foam when they're throwing the cork. Some people will just throw it as is. I prefer to not do that either, because if you do that, you get a lot of tumbling in the air, and that will cut down on your casting distance as well. So I just like to stick it right there in the top, and it'll separate by itself. You get really long casting distance when you're doing it like that. So, long story short, that's how that technique works. If anybody's got any questions, you can hit me up, or you can just leave a comment down at the bottom, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you guys have. Like I was saying, right now is the early part of August. You should go ahead and grab all this stuff now, because we don't know what's going on with the weather anymore. And by the time that we get to October, this technique is going to be wide open. I had a solid run just this past year for a good 9 to 10 weeks straight, where I was catching them my limit every trip on this particular technique. I was using some other stuff, but this one did a lot of damage when they were blowing up out of range and other people couldn't get to them. So, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you again.